Again, thank you for doing this. I'm a huge fan of your work, and I started actually reading one of your books, and I'm going to say this in a very proud way that I'm really struggling to understand the work that has gone into it, and I feel like when looking at your material, I feel like a newbie, and I think of that as a positive thing because I mean, improvement and learning new things and getting better at things, I think it should always be some sort of a priority in everyone's life, especially when you're in this career path. And it's great when something challenges me. So what triggered this conversation was the enablers graph that you put out. So I am more interested in the human side of this, right? So there are also other systemic issues. There's technology, like enablers related to technology and stuff like that. But I've been doing this for the last 10, 12 years, and most of the time when I tripped, it was because of my communication skills or not understanding the emotional drivers or triggers when working with people. I think most of the time, people who transition from teaching professions into this field as a natural lateral move, they don't understand that they're not the smartest person in the room anymore. They're not in the presence of a group that wants to learn from them, and they're not the experts anymore. That's when they suggest something like a performance improvement initiative or whatever, even if it's perfectly backed with data and common sense, and it's the most logical solution, we keep forgetting, and I'm going to speak for myself too, because I have also made this error. We kind of forget that people are not spreadsheets, make decisions based on numbers and logic, right? It's mostly emotional triggers, drivers, past events that made a mark on them. And you actually made it very simple to grasp what these human enablers are. So can you talk a little bit about that, and how does that factor, and what kind of percentage can you give, and what you can tell me about this, and I'm willing to understand your take on this.
All right, so a little backstory, but I think what we're talking about is this here. This is my EPPI fishbone diagram, if you will, and this all started back in 1979. I was exposed to the concepts of what's now known as human performance technology. That comes from the ISPI, Professional Society's view of things, and ASTD, now ATD, branded it as Human Performance Improvement, HPI. So HPT is the means to the ends of HPI, if you will. But so it was looking holistically, doing some systems thinking around performance, because what the thought leaders back in the 1960s at NSPI, which is now ASPI, they had discovered that even if they had stellar instruction, programmed instruction was their thing, kind of computer-based training before there was computers. And so what they learned is that you can have this perfect performance-based instruction, training, or learning, and sometimes it didn't make a difference to the performance. So they kind of went on a journey, many of them separately but concurrently, and discovering here's all these variables to performance, which is what we're trying to impact: people's ability to perform on the job, not just learning in an educational context, but in an enterprise context where we're training people, helping them learn, master their jobs. And so they were looking at all these variables. And so I was exposed to that in 1970. And then in 1981, I went to work for Motorola, and I got exposed to the total quality management movement, which were also looking at all the various variables to process performance because they were trying to reduce defects in outputs, make a better product by having a better process. What are the process variables? So I got exposed to all of that. And I saw for the first time back in 1981 what's called the Ishikawa diagram, the cause and effect diagram, the fishbone diagram, many different things created by Professor Ishikawa back in at the University of Japan in the 1950s. This was all part of the post-World War II quality improvement movement that Deming and Durand and many other quality gurus, help Japanese industries get better so that what they were producing wasn't known worldwide as junk. And so the fishbone, my fishbone, comes from the Ishikawa fishbone, and it said there was a process box, and then there were 4 spines on the fishbone, if you will, and they were the 4 M's. So not politically correct, but it was men, materials, methods, and machines. And so the 4 M's were what quality circles use to diagnose a problem. Got a problem here in the process, whatever, however you can describe it, and then you use this. Well, what are the aspects, the variables of the men component of the process, or the methods, or machinery, or materials? Is it the materials? So it's not the person, it's the materials. They're working with garbage inputs, and so that affects their output. You can train them and retrain them, and you're not going to do anything. It's the materials that are coming in. So how do you really diagnose? So that's the genesis for my fishbone diagram. So as I looked, and so I have like 3 components to my fishbone. There's the process itself, and this is attributed to the late Gary Rumler and what I learned from him at Motorola. He was a consultant that I got a chance to work with at Motorola, and he said that whenever he's diagnosing a performance problem, the first thing he looks at is the process. Is there one? If not, why not? If there's a process, people adhering to it, and if not, why not? And so you start with the process. And then he said he would give the humans the benefit of the doubt, and he would look elsewhere first. It's not that the humans can't be part of the problem or opportunity. It's that we would look at the environmental factors. And so the Ishikawa diagram, if you took out the men, then the 3 M's were methods, materials, and machines. And so I thought, well, that's the environment. That's what a human gets dropped into an environment, and then they're supposed to perform. So if you took the human out, what is it? Well, there's the process that they're supposed to be following, and then there's everything else, data and equipment, tools, machinery, the facilities, whether you've got running water, there's a culture, there's whether or not we have enough people to get the job. So there's all these other variables. And so how do I, separate them out to create a mental model that I can use when I'm diagnosing a performance problem, or the flip side of that same coin, an opportunity. So I would generally call that an issue. It's either a problem or opportunity. And so how do you look at this? So when I thought about, so what are the variables of the human, the people, the men, if you will, in the Ishikawa diagram language. And so I come at all of this stuff as a training guy. So I need to find out what are the awareness, knowledge, and skills that people need to have in order to be able to perform. And that's usually how I'm entering into this whole need to do some analysis, because if a training request was based on a problem, if it's new hires, we got some new hires coming in, they need training. Okay, sure, duh, yeah. But if it's a problem, well, what I was taught back in the first days of me coming out of college was that most of the time it's not a knowledge or skill deficit, it's something else. So if you do training or instruction or learning to solve that, it's not going to happen. And so you're going to look inadequate, incompetent yourself because you developed training and it didn't do a darn thing. So I learned that it was just as important to avoid doing training, instruction, learning if it's not going to solve the problem. So, but you can't just tell your client that because you're a support organization. You're there to support them and you're telling them, no, it's not a training thing. Well, then what the heck is it? So I better be prepared to say, we think it's this or this or this. You know, I have some probable causes for the gap in performance, but I don't know for sure. I didn't study it that well, to put it down and say for darn sure it's those things. But I needed to help my clients understand that because I'm there to help them. And if it's not training or instruction or learning, I need to help them figure out what they need to attend to. Maybe it is the materials that people are working with. And people know what to do. They're just working with faulty data or faulty materials. And so that's what's got to be resolved. So I can provide value add by helping my clients get to the point where we've got analysis data that tells them what's at the root of my problem or opportunity. And so that my intent was to create a framework and then to share that with my clients and to train others on my consulting organization staff to do that, and sometimes to train clients. So my fishbone says, besides the awareness, knowledge, and skill, there's other things that people bring or don't bring to the performance party. And so how can I look at that? And so there's four other sets of things, and they are the physical attributes. I mean, I was in the Navy, so I always think of this. The sonar man listening to the pings of, is there a submarine around? Well, they've got to have very good hearing. In fact, they've got to have the best hearing of everybody in the Navy. Let's look across the entire Navy and find the people who have the absolute best hearing and make them sonar men or radar men. The names have changed over time. But so that's it. So can they be blind? Yeah, they could be blind, but they've got to have really good hearing to put on those headsets and tell us, where's the ping coming from. And so, so there are those physical attributes. Maybe somebody's got to be strong. I worked in a lumber yard and I did inside sales, but occasionally I had to help the people in the back load the customer's truck with, bags of cement or whatever. And that's heavy stuff, and I couldn't do that all day long. But others on the staff could do that and load, and so they had that physical strength and stamina that was needed for their job, but not for my inside sales job, other than when I was helping out. And so there's those physical attributes. And so that's the second spine after awareness, knowledge, and skills. Because sometimes awareness, you just make people aware. That's good enough. They've got the prior knowledge. That's all they needed. Or you give them deeper education about the topic or whatever, and that's what they needed, and now they can perform. Or they actually had to have a skill and know how to apply that. They didn't have that in their prior knowledge, so now we've got to give it to them, and they can do that. But are there those physical requirements? And then the next category is psychological requirements. I did some analysis back in the mid-'80s for AT&T Network Systems, the manufacturing arm of AT&T, and the job was product managers. And the product manager job was different every day, all day long. You could be doing something in the morning and then an emergency happens and you have to switch and go do something else. Then you try to get back to the first thing and there's another emergency. And so it's just changing and it was just chaotic. Well, there are people that thrive in that kind of a work environment. And there are others that hate it and pray that they get fired or they can find another job. and so there's those psychological things, where people have to be ambiguity tolerant. Because sometimes that's just requirements. That's the job. We'd like to get standard and take all the craziness out, but sometimes that's not it. That's just the job. That's the environment that the person is going to work in. And so can they deal with that? Can they eventually get back to that first task and get it done despite all these distractions that interrupt them? And yes or no is the answer. So some people can do that and some people can't. So it's the old round peg in a square hole kind of thing. Can we find people that are psychologically aligned and appropriate for this particular job? Then the next thing after that was the intellectual attributes. And this was my attempt to go after things such as, are people strategic thinkers or concrete thinkers, or can they do both? Okay. Now this was all informed by my seen my own staff. This goes back to 1982. I started building staff in a small consulting firm after Motorola. And I had good analysts that were lousy designers. And I had great designers that were lousy analysts. And I had some people that could do both. So in America, we have, American baseball. So there are batters that bat from the right, and there's other batters that bat from the left, and we have this group of people called switch hitters. They can bat either way. Show me who your pitcher is, whether they're throwing left-handed or right-handed, and I'll switch to my advantage as a batter. Right. So, but God didn't create that many switch hitters in the world. God didn't create that many people who can do concrete, detailed thinking, and also lofty strategic envisioning some future state. There are people that can do both things there, but most people cannot. They can probably do one or the other, and some of them can actually do one or the other very, very well. And so does the job that we're looking at or the process that we're looking at require people in that process to be able to do that? Do we need some concrete thinkers in that process and strategic thinkers? Can we find enough of those to put that in one job, or do we have to have two people with two job titles doing that? Or how do we populate the process? What kinds of people? What do they got to have as they come in the door and all that stuff? And then the last spine on that part of the fishbone for the human enablers is personal values. If I don't like working with other people from other cultures, I may not be a good fit for some jobs because the job requires you to work with different people from different cultures. Right. And so there's, we can look at what does the job require. Sometimes it doesn't require any of this. Oh, the physical stuff, no, anybody can do it, whether they're deaf or blind or whatever, or maybe not. So we can look at each job that we're studying, because if we're trying to build performance-based instruction or training or learning and help somebody master that job, what does the job require? Because we shouldn't, be spending money trying to train and develop people and help them learn and master their job if they're not a good fit otherwise. And so we should do some screening, and that's generally when, if a recruiting and selection system hires people in from outside the company or inside the company into a job because we have an opening and we need to fill it. Well, what does that job require? What should we be looking for in the first place? This is a sonar man job. You're going to wear headsets and you got to hear the submarines sneak up on you. So, okay, so we better screen for good hearing. There's no sense putting guy into the training and find out after it's all done that his hearing isn't good enough. We should have done that on the front end. So how we bring people in, recruit, select them, onboard them, give them, their orientations to the company and the job and all of that, and give them their immediate survival skills, requires us to look for, the right people. So the intent of the fishbone spine is to look at a job and say, all right, so what are the awareness, knowledge, and skills? And I've got 17 categories of them that I use so that I can systematically derive them, tease them out once we look at the data on the performance. Here's the process, here's the output, here's the tasks. That's what people got to be able to do. All right, so then we can begin to figure out, well, what do they got to know? Are there any laws, regulations, and codes that they need to know when they're doing that? Oh, yes or no. Are there interpersonal skills that they need when they're doing that? Oh, yes or no. Is it written communications or verbal communications or both? So we can tease all that out and figure out what are the enablers for the human to perform in that process. And what did I wanted to do with all this as a training person was help my client understand that sometimes they've picked the wrong people in the job, and that's at the root of their problem. But it's not knowledge and skills. You're not going to train Guy to have better hearing if his hearing is physically a limitation that he brings. Or hearing's got nothing to do with it. No, you can be in a wheelchair and do the job. We can reasonably accommodate people that aren't, perfect, and because there is nobody, and have them be good enough and bring enough of the things that we need into that particular job.
Mm-hmm.
So as a consultant, I'm either brought in to help people develop instruction, training, learning for new hires. And so this is all less of a big deal. You just figure out what the job is and you train them how to do it. It's not as simple as that, but compared to when there's a problem and my client's got a big problem, let's just imagine this is worth $10 million a month. Okay, it's a big deal. All right, so let's go in there and try to solve this. And if the default has traditionally been, well, they probably need more training, retraining, new learning, relearning, whatever they call it. That's probably the solve. Okay, good. Executives think that that's it. Well, okay, so if I get a request, I can't be challenging somebody because I don't have any data. Who am I? I don't have any data to challenge. Well, maybe it's not a training problem. Well, Guy, you're in a support organization. You're supposed to be supporting us. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to say at the very beginning, let me hear your request. Let me clarify your request. Let me develop a quick plan very quickly. Here's how we're going to get it all done. And let's go and start and do the analysis. And at the end of the analysis phase, I have what I call the L&D pivot point. Mm-hmm. This is where we inform the client, here's the data that we've got from analysis. So before we go do design, let's look at that data. You can see here's the reasons for all your gaps in performance from the ideal. And none of them are knowledge and skills. So that's not at the root of your thing here. It's really, you got bad materials, you got nobody's following the process that exists because they say the process is no good. So everybody's going off and doing their own thing their own way. And so, these are where you need to fix. Okay, so maybe we need to do training in conjunction with those other fixes. Maybe we need to wait till those fixes are done and then start the training effort. And I use the word training because I want to train people to perform tasks, to produce outputs that meet the stakeholder requirements. This is not just about learning that. It's about learning it and then applying it and practice with feedback over and over again to get you good enough to go back to the job. And to me, that's the difference between education and training. But learning sometimes is communication, sometimes learning is education, sometimes learning is training and working on specific skills. And it's more than one and done. Let's try that again, Guy, and let's try that again the third time. Let's try that again. We're giving you feedback in between so that hopefully we're giving you reinforcing feedback. That was good. Corrective feedback. That wasn't so good. Here's what you should do instead. All right, let's try it again. And so if my goal as an instructional systems developer or learning experience designer and developer, I need people to perform back on the job. And so the fishbone diagram that helped me do the analysis data to feed my design also informs the design because that fishbone can tell me what are the barriers to performance. Well, sometimes you're working with lousy materials. The best thing, Guy, this is what the master performers would have said, the best thing, Guy, is to figure out those are bad materials and set them aside. Don't use them. And so, yeah. So, but if you didn't train people that there are these barriers to performance, so you may not be able to solve bad materials being sent to you to work on. But it'd be helpful if the person knows this is no good, set it aside and not even use it and build up a pile of scrap and avoid doing work and then having to do rework. So sometimes you can't fix the root cause, but you can train people to deal with it better, to recognize it early before it's needed, and that'll help performance overall. So the fishbone diagram overall is intended to help be a diagnostic tool. It's my mental model, because I know it so well, that I can just look at a situation and ask a bunch of questions to elicit data, elicit the answers, and tell me, well, what's needed? Is hearing needed? Is sight needed? Is strength and endurance needed because you're going to have to lift a bunch of heavy stuff and do it all day long? Oh, no, that's not part of it. So you can begin to look at how do I help my client improve performance? Because maybe it's not a knowledge and skill thing at all, or maybe it's a knowledge and skill thing in combination with other things about the humans, the people in the processes, or other things about the non-human environmental things that are part of the performance context.
Okay, all right. Just
I don't know if that helps. So what book were you reading?
just give me a second. I need to, I think, look it up. Just give me a second.
Well, yeah.
I think it was the first one you sent me.
Is that conducting performance-based instructional analysis?
I think it's, just give me a second. Guy, where's Guy?
The reason I have to ask this is because I cover
Conducting performance-based instructional analysis.
Yeah, so when I'm doing so my thing in that book is that I start doing instructional analysis during the request for training or learning. I do it when I'm doing project planning and reviewing the planning with the client and the stakeholder. This is my model that I use as a consultant. So, it needs to be adapted for most people because they're not consultants like I was. But so I do analysis in the analysis phase, and later when I'm done with the analysis phase in design, I'm doing analysis. And when I'm doing development, I'm doing analysis. And when I do pilot testing, I'm doing analysis. And when I update everything before I release it to the world, I'm doing analysis. So my goal with that book is to try to help people avoid getting caught up in analysis paralysis, where they're working on the front end and they don't know what they need. They don't know if they have enough to get started. They don't know when to stop. So they're in paralysis. So my thing is always, well, I know what data I need. We can go get it this way or we can go get it that way, but let's go get it and be done with it and then review it to make sure it's good to use in design. Because I know I'm going to be doing more analysis in design. And whatever stays in design, because sometimes they say, oh, you got modules A, B, C, and D. We love A and B. D, that's okay. C, throw it away. We don't even want to work on it anymore. So I would have saved all the time doing analysis on C when I was going to throw it away anyway after the design review. And so now when I get into development, I know this is serious. I need to do A, B, and D, and I need to go deep, and I need to finally get to cognitive task analysis. I know what the behaviors are. I know what the visible tasks are. You do this, you do that, you do this, you do that. But what the heck are you thinking about when you're doing the first task and the second task and the third task? Because I can see that, this, if it's rote performance, the same thing each and every time, okay, no big deal, not a lot of thinking going on. But most performance is not rote. There are variables. It's raining outside today, not sunny, so you do it differently. You pack differently. You wear a raincoat outside, or whatever so you have to respond. You have to anticipate as a performer. So you're doing cognitive tasks, thinking tasks, before, during, and after the behavioral tasks, the doing tasks. And so cognitive task analysis, figuring out what people really need to be thinking before, during, and after they're doing, that's tricky. That takes a little bit of digging. And so I reserve all of that for the development phase. I don't worry about an analysis phase that I haven't got all the cognitive tasks identified. I don't worry about it when I'm doing design because I'm going to get that when I do development. And so I kind of get it just in time, because now I've got to, develop some content, and we need to say, learner, as a performer, before you start, you think about this, this, and this, and now you're ready to go. And then you respond accordingly, and you look for variances. Is this time that you're going to perform going to be the same as the last time, or could it be different for some good reason? And what are those good reasons, and how do you begin to think about things? Now, as a consultant coming in, I was working on a lot of high stakes performance where the risks and rewards are high, not medium, not low, not zero. And so do you do what I'm suggesting here, all this cognitive task analysis and all that, and everything? No. if it's low risk, low rewards, but people, it's an assignment, you've got to build some instructional content, learning content to support the request. Maybe you don't have to do all of that for this one chunk. But maybe this other thing where people could blow up the building. Oh yeah, so we better, we're gonna treat that differently than this thing where, oh, they logged in incorrectly and now they got to log in again. No big deal. The failure is not of consequence to the greater system. It may embarrass me that I logged in wrong, and but so that's why we want to provide people with the guidance or learning that they need in order to be able to get into the job initially and not make a fool out of themselves, and to begin to climb the learning and performance curves with the things that we give them, so that they can achieve some level of success sooner rather than later.
Right. I think I need to look back at my notes to understand this. You make it sound so simple, but I can sure.
So one of the things I would have done in one of my workshops is said, when you were a kid, did you have a job? And if you did, use that fishbone to think, what are the psychological issues? Do you have to deal with angry customers? Do we, so no, all the customers were always very nice because we ran an ice cream shop and we gave away free samples. So everybody's happy. No. Customers come in and they complain and they're mad. So how do you deal with, how do you do active listening when people are mad? Because doing active listening when everybody's happy and smiling, that's different than when people are mad.
Right. Or if there's a mix of confused people, happy people, angry people, people having a bad day and they're reacting to stuff differently, and that levels of, different levels of active listening required at those.
Exactly. So there are variances. That's what we're looking for. So if guys got to have really good hearing, because the job requires it, because he's on the phone. So guy can't be on, with a headset or whatever. Not necessarily the handset, but so you're on the phone. So you got to be able to hear what people are saying, and if you've got bad hearing, you can't hear, and so that is a bad customer experience because the employee is trapped in a job where they're not suited for that job. So that's so the goal was, when I'm doing analysis, most of the time the root cause is got to do with the process itself. It's a bad process, or there isn't one. Everybody's doing their own thing, and that's why we got all this variation. And some people are doing good work, and other people are doing bad work. But it's because everybody's doing a different process. So you need to standardize on the process, make it as rigorous as required, and as flexible as feasible, because the process is dealing with, sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's not. And so how does the process adjust to the variances in the environment, in the, if there's, the customers are happy or they're sad or they're angry or they're frothing at the mouth? How do we train the person, help the person learn to master dealing with the various situations? And when we have gotten the analysis data and fed our design and developed those content, we can put people in authentic practice exercises where they're dealing with customers who are screaming at them. And it's awfully late then to find out that the trainee, the learner, doesn't like being screamed at. And so they decided they got to drop out and quit, and they're gone, and we have turnover. Well, we should have screened them in the first place we should have known that the job well enough to know that it's not all sunshine, and it's sometimes, hellacious. It's the world's on fire, or whatever the real world situation and variances are. People need to prepare to deal with that. And we can even then begin to look at, they've got to be ambiguity tolerant. It's going to be different every day. They may have a plan for what they're trying to get done, and they may or may not be able to get to it because there may be more important things. So how do I then judge, is this important enough for me to stop what I'm doing and attend to this, or should I defer dealing with that till later? Those are part of the things that I may have to be doing all day long. Deciding, okay, ignore that, ignore this, ignore that. Oh, stop, got to do that one. Okay, back to what I was doing in the first place. Ignore this, ignore. So, we need to help prepare people so that they can do those kinds of things. But we should know from experience that not everybody is suited to that. So let's not spend money helping people learn things when they're not suited for the job in the first place. And so we can't fix things with learning. We may help the recruiters and the managers learn that, hey, look out that you don't hire a square peg for a round hole, because there's just splinters then, and that's ain't no good for anybody. So how do we affect performance? Because good learning and development with right people that have all the other attributes and values that are needed, that's a powerful combination. And so my clients didn't always do this, but they usually saw that if there were problems with the other attributes and values, and that's what the current state problem root causes are attributed back to that. It's not the process, it's not anything in the environment, it's the people. We got the wrong people in these jobs here. And we don't like to think, though, we screwed up, and now what do we do?
Right.
But those people likely aren't happy in those jobs. They're barely surviving, they're tolerating it, they're miserable, but maybe they're getting the job done and they're performing at a high level, but hating every moment of it.
Right.
That's no good. And that's not sustainable. So that may work for a few months or a few quarters, but after that, you're going to have this turnover and you're going to have to start all over again. Well, why don't you then select the right people in the first place? So part of my goal was always to help my clients see that, knowledge and skills, Guy can help you figure out the knowledge and skills. What's the process? What are the tasks? What do people got to know to be able to do? But Guy's bringing back other data that suggests maybe we need to take a look at our recruiting and selection system. And there's been times when I was brought into a project and told it's for this reason. And then I find out later on, well, it was for that reason, but these other reasons too. We have tremendous turnover, Guy. I did some work for Bank of America, and I didn't find out till almost 10 years later that we had reduced turnover for bank tellers from some huge high level down to, less than a quarter of what it was. So simply because they were training people on how to do the job. But they still had turnover, and that turnover was generally attributed to the fact that the people, once they figured out what the job was like, it was too boring for them. It wasn't enough excitement. It was either doing this transaction at the teller window, or it was that or this or that. It was very limited. And some people are okay with a job like that. Others, that's not, it's not, they can't get excited going to work every morning.
Right. Guy, I have to thank you so much. I mean, this is really, really interesting, and I hope we can do more of these, because these are really valuable inputs and insights. And I think I need to also up my game a little bit to, understand the systems behind this. And I think everyone should be looking for some of these so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel about this. Because
there are dozens, quite frankly, of other approaches, other people's approaches that are similar to what I do, and it's just configured a little bit differently and got different words labeling things. But a lot of what I do was informed by what was going on in the 70s and 60s. I was lucky that the mentors that I had from day one were aware of these, were practicing these things, and helped me learn these. And so there's a starting point in all of this. And depending what your job is, because not all jobs in L&D are the same. Some people spend more time doing design, some do analysis, some do development. And the language that we use is very muddled and different everywhere you go. And new people coming in need to help demystify their context, figure out what their deliverables are, figure out what they've got to know, and in order to be able to do and produce those deliverables in their context. But there are certainly a lot of resources around, and my mission now as in retirement is to help learning and development organizations, leaders, and practitioners become more performance-based. How to focus on that performance and enable it through whatever means. It may be some learning is needed, but there may be other things that really altogether will have the impact, but the learning all by itself won't. And so the return on investment will be nil or negative. And that's squandering shareholder equity, and nobody likes that. And we want to take shareholder equity and invest it for significant returns where we can really leverage performance and help people master their jobs so that they, because no one likes to be in a job that they can't quite master. They're forever, fearful of being caught, and then what happens to them in their lives if that happens. So those of us in learning and development can help people master jobs, but we've got to be focused on what those jobs are in the first place. It's not about topics or skills or behaviors or competencies. It's about performing tasks to produce outputs that meet all the stakeholder requirements.
I think this is an excellent full stop, because this with so few words, I think that kind of sends the message. And thank you very much. And the Google Meets, I think it's going to stop the call. So I want to say a proper goodbye to you, and I hope we can do more of these in different topics. And if you could spare some time for me, I would be really grateful.
Well, let's do that. All right. Well, thank you and have a great day.
You too, Guy. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.